I am extremely late on this video. School has been coming up, and I have also had some extreme art block and some other factors in my life, as well as procrastination, that have prevented me from uploading. But we are finally on our next episode of Sticks and Stones, which I will gladly make this into a longer video, because I need to say I apologize. So I guess let's get into the spooky stories, and like and subscribe. Mike sat in his own room, wide awake as he stared at his phone screen. The journalist course was harder than he thought it'd be. Doing a course that made you research things, not his best move. Mike sighed, close to throwing this course down the drain, until he came upon an interesting thread. "Did you guys hear about the new murders?" one user posted, immediately catching Mike's attention. He continued to read. "Yeah, I heard the police call him the Bloody Painter," another poster replied. In the morning, Danny's eyes flitted open. The apartment was silent, for the most part. Danny slowly sat up, his shoulder burning with a familiar ache of sleeping on it wrong. Danny reached up, rubbing his muscles with a sleepy groan. Danny swung his legs over the edge of the bed, blinking as the bright sunlight filtered in through the open window. The golden rays lit up the room a bit, despite the dark colors. Daniel rubbed his eyes, pushing his body off the mattress. He stumbled at first, but gained balance quickly. Danny made his way to his bedroom door, his black hair messier than usual because of his struggle for sleep the night before. Danny slowly stepped out of his bedroom, brushing his messy bangs from his face. Danny looked over at the clock. 6:02 a.m. Great, he thought to himself as he grabbed a coffee mug and reached for the coffee pot. They have class in less than an hour. Pouring himself a cup of coffee. Ignore the stuttering, I guess. Danny grabbed his bag, ensuring he had everything. Danny carefully picked up the cup of coffee, sitting on the couch. He didn't grab his phone at first, taking a sip of the bitter, hot liquid in his cup. After a moment, he grabbed his phone. Danny wasn't active on social media often, but he'd scroll through every so often when he had nothing to do or was just bored out of his mind. Taking a long drink, Danny hardly noticed how the drink burned down his throat. He scrolled through a few videos. A bunch of teens, some from his college, trying to solve the new murder case. Daniel rolled his eyes. Even though he was in a criminal justice course, there wasn't enough evidence to find anyone that could be the killer. Once his cup was empty, Danny set it in the sink, popping his medications in his mouth and swallowing them down. He threw his bag over his shoulder and reluctantly left the apartment. "This is what I get for picking morning classes," Daniel sleepily muttered as he adjusted his bag that still rested on his shoulder. He yawned softly, simply going through the motions of walking to campus into his first class. Danny arrived a bit after his professor, an older woman who always wore her brown hair up in a messy bun that made it look like she had been rushed out of bed. She wore a shirt that said FBI printed on the front and a pair of blue jeans. "Morning, Miss Ryans," Danny called out with a wave as he climbed the stairs to his seat. The professor lifted her head, pushing her glasses up her nose with one finger as she adjusted a few papers on her desk. A soft smile pulled at her painted lips as she watched Daniel begin to unpack with what he needed that day. Good morning, Danny," Miss Ryans called back. Her voice was a little husky from her years of smoking before she quit a couple years ago. "I trust you won't fall asleep in my class today," Miss Ryans teased lightly. Danny shrugged, smirking a bit, as he opened one eye and leaned back in his seat as he chuckled lightly. "No promises. Sorry," Daniel replied. He stared up at the ceiling, his lips parted weird. This reminded him of something. 9 years prior. Hey. Helen reached out, shaking Daniel awake gently. Danny opened his eyes, just enough to see Helen's cold blue eyes staring back at him. "You fell asleep during class again, Danny," Helen remarked, in his usual calm tone. Danny mumbled something, pushing his body up as he stood. He didn't care. Why should he? "Thanks," Daniel muttered, as he glanced at Helen from the corner of his eye. Present day. While Daniel stared at the ceiling, students began filing in one by one into the lecture hall. Some were fully awake. Some looked like they had to take 20 shots of espresso and a 24-hour energy shot from the store to stay awake. Everyone began to take their seats, conversing with those around them. Danny just sat there. He didn't know many people here. He really didn't want to. Some always smelled of drugs or alcohol to the point a canine would probably gag at the scent, and others just seemed too annoying to be around. "All right, settle down, everyone. Get to your seats," Miss Rhines yelled so everyone else could hear her. The extra voices slowly quieted down, and people arrived at their seats. After class, Daniel was slowly walking on campus. He was checking the time to see how long it was until his afternoon classes. He suddenly felt a rough hand shove him to the ground, causing him to fall face first into the grass. The person who shoved him down began to laugh loudly, along with a few others. Most of the bystanders didn't do anything, looking away or ignoring the events altogether. "Wow, you really are pathetic," a girl with long brunette hair taunted as Daniel tried to get onto his feet, just to be kicked down again. More people began to taunt and kick him, some throwing jagged rocks at his head that tore his skin and caused him to bleed. Danny didn't say anything, simply clenched his fists as he waited for it all to end. 3 weeks later, Danny sat in the cold interrogation room, tapping his fingers on the table impatiently. He'd been in here for what felt like hours. Finally, the door opened and a police officer stepped in. He sat across from Daniel, holding a folder. Daniel raised a brow, refusing to speak first as he waited to hear why he was here. "Daniel Jones, correct?" the detective asked calmly. Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes giving away how annoyed this was making him. "Daniel, we need to ask some questions. We're asking all your classmates, so don't worry," the officer explained as he placed a photo on the table. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he looked at it. It was the girl with long brunette hair, the one he once called his friend. "I don't know her," Daniel said bluntly, as he raised his head, almost as if he'd rehearsed how he would say it. The officer hummed, grabbing a second photo of a crime scene. A blonde girl, hanging by her own intestines, and her face peeled to reveal muscles. Daniel simply shrugged and shook his head. "No, I don't know either of them, sir," Daniel stated, his voice apathetic and empty as he stared. His voice was apathetic. His voice apathetic and empty as he stared at the officer coldly. The detective sighed, leaning back as he crossed his arms over his chest. "The first girl was found still alive, thankfully," the detective explained. The detective trailed off. Daniel wasn't fazed. He simply rubbed his side. Why would he care? She ruined his life, just to be petty. Since the police didn't have any more evidence, Daniel was allowed to leave. He went right to his apartment, or would have, if she didn't block his way. The girl with long brunette hair looked at Daniel with teary eyes. She stepped closer, trying to hug him. Daniel grit his teeth, his eyes furious. Where did she find the audacity to ruin his life, spread rumors, bully and tease him, and then think she could just come back into his life as if nothing had happened? Daniel pushed past her, his hands in his hoodie pockets. Slowly, a laugh began to spill past Daniel's lips. His fingers wrapped around a knife that was concealed by his hoodie pocket. Daniel glanced at the brunette. He grinned slowly. It was dark. Not many people were out, and the only light source was the street lamps. Danny, I'm sorry, the brunette called out, reaching out a hand to grab his own, like when they were younger. It was childish and stupid to do just because of a reaction. I know, but a rejection. I know, but... Daniel turned to his body, pulling her close and making her think she was forgiven. Daniel slowly pulled the knife from his pocket. He held the knife tightly, no emotion in his mixed-matched eyes, as he raised the blade and plunged it into the girl's back. She gasped. Daniel quickly covered her mouth as she tried to scream. Daniel pulled the blade from her back, stabbing the back of her head over and over and over again. He gently laid her barely living body onto the grass near the sidewalk to finish the job. He raised the blade up high, smiling with crazed eyes, before bringing the blade down on her throat. The very next morning, questions were being asked. Why there was blood on the sidewalk and grass where the brunette girl was. So many questions. Daniel, he wasn't fazed. He was careful to perfectly preserve the body. He took out the organs, sewed every stab wound on the girl's body. He was careful while putting her hair in a cute style and putting an outfit on her body that reminded him of the times before she turned against him. Nobody batted an eye when Danny became reclusive for about less than a month or so. There Dan goes again, making those weird life-size dolls to resemble his friends. Logan, a veterinary student, sighed as he talked to Xavier, who nodded. Xavier lifted his hands, signing to Logan calmly. Yeah, he does that sometimes if he forgets his medications. Xavier sighed softly, while shrugging. Logan laughed slightly, shaking his head. I swear, Logan muttered, his heavy Texan accent hard to ignore as he leaned back in his chair. One of these days, if he keeps forgetting to take them pills, he'll be put in the loony bin, I tell you. Logan exclaimed as his voice barely heard from the amount of people in the cafeteria in that moment. Xavier chuckled, shaking his head as he signed to Logan again. How the heck am I friends with you guys? You're all morons. Xavier's hands moved fluently. He couldn't speak well, so he used ASL instead. It was much easier to work with anyways, since his dream was to teach for those who were deaf. Logan looked at Xavier's hands, squinting his eyes. He hadn't learned ASL previously, but he was trying his best to understand now. Logan laughed, a loud, boisterous sound that once again was swallowed up by the surrounding noises. "'Cause you love us?" Logan exclaimed, taking a drink of his soda while Xavier rolled his eyes with a chuckle. Isaac and Mike walked over, sitting on either side of Xavier and Logan. We finally got Danny out of his room. He'll be here soon, Isaac explained gleefully. His golden locks rested just above his shoulders. Mike nodded, taking a couple of Isaac's fries with a sly grin. "About damn time," Logan exclaimed as he threw one hand in the air. The others chuckled a bit. "I'll tell you all what," Logan began. "Oh no, not this again," Mike groaned, taking a sip of his milkshake while rolling his eyes. Logan shot Mike a playful glare before he continued speaking.